Hello, everyone. Welcome to our CAE seminars. I'm very pleased to have as our guest speaker, Professor Suchi Gopal. She is a professor in the Department of Earth and Environment at Boston University. She serves on the Faculty Steering Committee of Global Development Policy Center and is a faculty associate at the Frederick Pardee Center for the Study of Longer Range Future. She holds a visitor professor appointment at the Vienna University of Business and Economics in Austria. She does a lot of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research. These primarily delve into the intricate world of geospatial data analysis, modeling, GIS, data mining, information visualization, ANNs, etc. She will be talking, you can see the topic on the screen, Shaping Tomorrow, Geospatial Technologies, AI and Climate Fintech in Addressing Societal Sustainability and Resilience. So thank you very much, Professor Gopal, for doing this, and the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. And I really look forward to hearing back from the students, especially with questions regarding the topic, because I'm trying to look at the intersection of sustainability and engineering, particularly towards the end of the lecture. So I want to get started. By telling you I would be addressing a number of different projects and a number of different problems that I've been involved in. Of course, many of these have been published. So the first one I want to start with is in the world of public health. How do you sort of look at predicting malaria hotspots in Sub-Saharan Africa? And what do you do about it? What would be the insights? How would you use it to drive policy and eradication, or helping people, cope with the disease and so on? The second sort of issue that I'm looking at is somewhat recent, and this is mapping the unseen crisis, and I'm looking at opioid mortality across the US, and I'm trying to use spatial statistics to understand what are called direct and indirect effects with the spatial panel models. These are all completely new models that have come about. And so this is a very interesting case study to see the utility of the models, as well as to see what it can do in terms of helping us solve or address this issue for planning purposes or healthcare policy purposes, and so on. The third topic that I'm looking at is got the title, Who Killed the Trees? And this is looking at aging gas infrastructure in cities like Boston, and looking at the methane gas leaks that are underground that are killing trees that are more than 50 or 60 years old. And so we have an entire data set that we used in 3 different towns. And I would be exploring and exploiting this data set to talk about our forensic environmental investigations of the leaks. The fourth topic is something that I've worked in terms of Cambodia, and it's to do with food, water, and energy securities. And it's almost like a tug of war between development of hydroelectric power dams and all the consequences and impacts on the people in Cambodia around the Great Lake of the Mekong, which is called as Tonle Sap. And here my interest would be to develop KPIs or metrics that would help us, inform the public and the decision makers in order to make better choices and decisions. And the last one is I want to take a coastal pulse, and this is more related with our COPES project, Strong Coast. And we want to design metrics for coastal communities from the point of view of planning, from the point of view of even engineering, and more importantly, from the point of view of drawing financial investments. So I think Professor Beck talked to you about nature-based solutions. I want to take more of a finance and sustainable finance and fintech kind of solution to address this problem. And the last thing I want to challenge you with is, what are the smart engineering solutions that you guys all so know about, and how can you help us address societal problems, especially dealing with sustainability? And this has become a very challenging sort of a issue. At the same time, it's pretty important across the globe as many countries are heading towards addressing net zero. They have goals for 2030, they have goals for 2050. None of these goals can be met without engineering solutions. So those are my broad 5 topics, and I'm going to deal with each one in some detail. And please ask me questions either as I'm presenting or towards the end. I don't mind. So the first study is Unveiling the Hotbeds of Infection. We are looking at spatial hotspots of malaria in Sub-Saharan Africa. And so I would be using a spatial hotspot analysis, which is called as measures of autocorrelation, spatial autocorrelation in the world of GIS literature. And the insight is we should be able to provide this insights in order to direct the available funds, which are kind of limited, and vaccinations to the areas that are in the hotspots first. And this is a project we completed in Ethiopia as well as in Kenya. So why is this important? It's important because 50% of the world's population is at risk of malaria, and this number is only increasing with warming temperatures and erratic rainfall and so on. In 2022, there were an estimated 247 million cases of malaria and more than 619,000 deaths, according to the WHO. Most of the malaria is prevalent in Sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm explaining to you the malaria transmission cycle. If anybody is interested, I could go in more detail. So you might ask me what exactly can be done if I know my hotspot analysis. I could be giving these so-called malaria nets. I could be sort of vaccinating people. I could sort of help them sort of avoid areas which are highly, attractive to mosquitoes, like even old tires and puddles of water, collected water will attract mosquitoes. We can look at those kinds of things with this analysis, as well as I could be using spray and sort of preventing further spread of malaria and spraying down the mosquitoes and so on. So I want to talk a little bit more about what exactly is the implication in public health, knowing this hotspot analysis of malaria. So what I would want to be doing is to develop an early warning system for the key stakeholders in order to prevent and manage crises. So climate change threatens and increases these transmission rates, and these kinds of transmission patterns are seen in a lot of different areas, including Ethiopia. And I'd be happy to answer questions. I'm just going over into my analysis. So what is the types of data that we could use in order to develop these early warning systems for helping these countries deal with the problem of hotspots and increased transmission and so on? We need to understand elevation, rainfall, population. We need to also see what was the patient information that was collected in the field. We need to understand gender and age differences. Gender is particularly important, it seems. We need to understand mosquito food sources, as I told you, and obviously the road networks and things like that from the point of view of the infrastructure. We want to create a comprehensive model to predict these hotspots, and we want to obviously link it to solutions. So here are all my maps, which kind of show you where exactly is Ethiopia, the elevation, the risk stratification of the malaria in Ethiopia is shown on the map, which is shown in green. And I would want to sort of go on with making predictions, looking at temperature and rainfall to see if they have anything to do with, making my predictions somewhat more, robust. I'm going to be looking at contagion incidents, that type of data. And more importantly, I want to be using spatial statistics. And I would like to use this measure called Moran's I, which is a measure of spatial autocorrelation. And that evaluates if the distribution of that particular incidence of the disease is clustered or dispersed or random across my study area. So, this Moran's I is widely used in public health now, and it sort of measures the incidence of a disease at a particular point xi, and it looks at the average x bar over a whole range, and it looks at the cross product in the numerator and comes up with this measure where a positive value will indicate that there are high values of malaria clustering, and negative value indicates that there are high values that are located very close to low areas in terms of transmission, and a zero value here indicates a random spatial pattern. So using this type of analysis, we can see what's happening with the many different malaria types in this region of Ethiopia that we are looking at, which is called East Showa. So I'm able to point out to you that there are areas of low, areas of medium, and areas of very high transmission or incidence, distributions. And I'm looking at three different types of malaria types, falciparum and vivax being very important in Ethiopia. And now I'm able to look at the Plasmodium falciparum, which is the most dangerous form of malaria. And we are able to sort of look at what is the distribution and what can we make out from these maps, and how can we sort of make prevention the number one criteria in these hotspots. So we published this paper, and of course, lots of people have sort of studied it and looked at it. And obviously, we can go further because we could be using this type of analysis for both testing and vaccination. We could also be looking at all kinds of iPhone apps, which are now out there. One of them, which runs public health campaigns, is called LifeLens. So obviously, there's a lot of engineering and technology that's available now in order to direct the available funds and vaccinations to the people who need it the most. So spatial analysis and these hotspot cluster studies help us to address a real problem in public health, especially allocating sparse resources and funds to the right locations. That's my study number one. In study number two, I'm going to introduce a more advanced technique, which is called spatial panel models. And the insight here is that the spatial neighborhood effects are very important in terms of making a prediction or analyzing opioid addiction in the mortality in the US. And we also want to look at space and time together in terms of these spatio-temporal trends. And I'll talk about it in some depth. So opioid addiction, as you know, and opioid overdose mortality has become a very pressing health problem in the US. And as many of the people, including Purdue Pharma, funded by the Sackler family, have been legally implicated, opioid, prescriptions and opioid overdose mortality is somewhat more, has been replaced or substituted by fentanyls, which is coming from all other parts of the world, including China and across the border. So this particular opioid mortality that we are looking at is in the United States between, a certain period, 2014 to 2019. And we are looking at demographic factors, economic factors that influence the mortality in different regions. And I want to use what's called a spatial Durbin panel data model. And I want to look at what are called direct effects, that are the factors that are controlling the mortality, predicting mortality within a state, and indirect effects, which are the spillover effects. So with the minute I say spillover effects, you need to think about neighborhoods. So what are the neighbors of the state of Florida that are immediately connected to it? Sometimes these neighborhoods spread over larger distances because of the fact that there is, transportation and highways that bring people from many different states into Florida. So we can look at that. So basically, I'm formulating this spatial Durbin model where Y is the opioid-related mortality rate, A W is my spatial weight matrix given the importance attached to the neighbors. And X are all the explanatory variables like prescription rates, poverty levels, education, race, and so on. And the rest of them are coefficients that I have to estimate. And I'm using a MATLAB package that was developed by Professor Lesage. And this model helps me look at goodness of fit measures and other validation techniques. And if you are interested, I can, of course, point you out to the paper that was just published. So I'm going to be looking at and talking about racial and ethnic structure of a state. What is the age composition of a state that seems to be important for opioid mortality? What's the educational attainment that again explains something, or it has a relationship with mortality? And obviously poverty rates, unemployment rates, and low incomes are also added. And the other two things that are very important is the prescription rates of opioids, because it was an overprescribed drug at one point, and the health insurance coverage of the various states. And I will not go into this other than to say, this is a table which shows me the posterior means which are significant in explaining the total impacts that are happening in terms of explaining the opioid mortality. Percent white, percent Hispanic, percent native, all of these factors are significant, and that's why they're all marked in red. And I'll talk a bit more about this because this is important in terms of explanation. So what am I trying to do? I'm looking at direct effects, which means I'm looking at what are the changes in the independent variable, which is my mortality, that is directly being impacted in that particular region. And what is the nature of this spillover effect? So if I'm going to take action in Florida for tackling this problem, I cannot just be looking at Florida. I need to be looking at what are all the influential neighbors that are also leading to these so-called spillover effects, such that I can come up with a better health directive. So problems such as the opioid mortality cannot be tackled alone by one single state or one single city. It has to be tackled in a much more, sense of a much more macro region or even the country at large. And this is what we are trying to sort of say by doing these kinds of studies. So we want to guide public health interventions and policies. We want to be able to, spot high-risk areas. We want to tailor specific interventions, and we want to, again, allocate resources such that this problem is being handled, in the right way. And this paper is published in 2023, so it's available if you want to take a look at it. But obviously, there's a lot more things that can happen. There could be a misspecification of the model. We may not have included some important variable in the model. And this is a study that can go on in terms of regions or in terms of even states. So this particular specific study was done for the entire country over a certain period, as I mentioned. And we could extend it and look at much further sort of data spaces. So it's a big data sort of a challenge, looking at this mortality and trying to explain the broader trends that have happened in the last 20 years, for which data has been collected. So I'll let you sort of take a look at it and ask me questions if you have any. And I'm moving to my third study. So the third study is looking at who killed the trees, and we are looking at methane gas leaks. And this is a very interesting problem because it is something invisible. People can't smell methane, and it's something underground because the aging infrastructure of pipes underground is what causes the leaks, and the roots of the tree get into these leaky prone pipes and the trees die. So that's the first indication that we have that there is a methane leak. And of course, as you all know, in many parts of the US, these leaks have led to gas explosions and people dying even, and houses burning and so on. The whole, sections of neighborhoods going on fire. So the insight here is we should be able to develop a system that can inform local and state governments to be more engaged with this problem. And my colleague, Nathan Phillips, is very highly involved in this kind of, access or talking to the public and stakeholders. And I'll describe a bit more of what we did in terms of this project. So the pipelines in Boston are pretty old. So they are more than 100 years old. Some of them are leak prone, and many trees have died. And I'm showing you pictures of the same tree at different points in time. And we go with experts. And another person who's been who has collected all this data and who helped us with our data collection was Bob Ackley, who's quoted in one of the papers also. And what he did was went in and measured the tree, health, as well as looked at the details of the gas leak using all kinds of different instruments. And right now we have very sophisticated ways of gathering this data. And I can go into detail talking about that. But obviously what we want to look at is how do we sort of deal with it as a big data problem? So we looked at all of the data in terms of latitude, longitude of the particular tree. We looked at what exactly was the rating given to the tree. Is it a leak-prone area? Is it, what's the tendency? Did the tree have the same set of problems before? What exactly was done with the leak in terms of national grid? Was the repair effectively managed? Was there a patch put in place? What exactly is happening to the species? And we have all the details of the tree, including the basal diameter and the height of the tree, the species quality, the coding, and the condition of the tree that was rated by an expert, saying this tree looks healthy, this tree, has got some problems, and so on. So all of this is used to train a neural network. And we sort of came up with lots of different conclusions using an AI and a machine learning approach. So we are looking at 4 different towns and verifying over 3 different time periods, 2008, 2012, and 2016. And we are able to sort of use a neural network and make all kinds of predictions. Our networks perform best when the trees are near death, meaning they are able to give us 100% accuracy in making a prediction. But if you take in general overall sort of prediction, it's only got an accuracy of 76% or so. So we sort of validated our expert data in order to make predictions for future tree deaths. And this kind of technology with this kind of data should be repeatable across other parts of other areas that have the same gas leak problem. So gas leaks are also a public health problem, but obviously the first sign that something is wrong in order to get it fixed would be looking at the trees, because the trees are dying. And of course, the city has to work in close collaboration with, the providers of the natural gas, which in our case is Eversource or any other company that's operating in that part of the country, and obviously patch up this or repair this or fix this. And again, here engineering can play a big role because these fixes are temporary, they're not permanent. So one of the things and one of the challenges is how do we is there certain parts of the street networks that can be taken off natural gas, and can we sort of have microgrids established with solar panels and so on? Are there other kinds of solutions, smart solutions that engineers could come up with in order to address this aging infrastructure problems that are present in the Northeast as well as in many other parts of the country? That's a challenge for you. So we developed an online tool to assess and predict the incidence of these dying trees. We put it on a nice map so people can interact with the map and see the type of data that we have. And we can look at what exactly are the trees that are healthy, what are the totally damaged trees that are shown in red. And we could be sort of cross-comparing what exactly makes a tree in that condition or state, can we sort of understand something about the infrastructure of the pipelines under the ground, because we can't really see it. So that was that study. So I'm moving on to the next one, which is balancing act between food, water, and energy securities in Cambodia. This is a very interesting problem because we had to engage public and stakeholders on the ground, which includes NGOs, fishermen, and all of the groups. And we had to use a data science and metrics in order to tell convincing stories. And it's almost like you need to develop virtual reality or some sort of games to take people on a journey to talk about food security, food insecurity, and explain these metrics along the way. There's no other way to sort of, convince people that something real is happening. And so that was the challenge that we had. We worked on this project for more than 6 or 7 years in Cambodia, and this was funded by MacArthur as well as Conservation International. So what we have here is Cambodia and the region of Cambodia, which is Tonle Sap, where the Mekong pulsates, and it's a river Mekong that pulsates and looks almost like a lake. And this actually provides food and livelihoods to more than 1 million people of Cambodia right around who live there. So the problem came when the Mekong was going to be dammed with hydroelectric power dams, and that sort of threatens the sensitive ecosystem of this area, as well as the food security, because not all the fish could sort of migrate down to Tonle Sap from upstream of the Mekong in China. And so we looked at this particular problem using what's called the coupled human natural systems, or the model we use is called MIMES. And I'll talk a bit more about it just to get you situated. So we collected a lot of data in the field, and we used remote sensing and GIS, census, economic surveys, and so on. And we created what's called a spatially explicit dynamic model of all the ecosystem functions in this particular region. And we developed a decision support tool that can guide state and local officials, as well as farmers and fishermen and NGOs in order to make the right decisions. And we could also display scenario results. So we used a framework that's been popularized in the European Union called DIPSA, which talks about drivers, pressures, states, impacts, and responses of a system. And we are looking at this region, which is the Tonle Sap that's in black, and all the hatched lines around it are the region of interest. And we are looking at the impact of this dam building and hydroelectric power production that's happening in many parts of the river, coupled with the climate change. And we want to be able to provide responses that would help people mitigate and adapt to the changing conditions that's happening in the Tonle Sap. So the model that we built is called MIMES, which joins together biosphere, anthrosphere, lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere, all of the systems into one system. And it helps sort of talk about the coupling, the dynamic coupling that's happening amongst the many systems. And the anthroposphere, of course, includes humans. And it also used nature-based, understanding nature-based solutions, looking at nature capital provided by nature. And we look at what's happening in this region and how does it influence fisheries? How does it influence the flow of the river? What's going to happen with climate change? So we look at a remarkable number of scenarios, all in this system that's happening or that is going to happen, that will impact people's decisions on the ground. And again, since this project is also pretty immense, we worked on it for 5 to 8 years. I will be happy to answer questions because we did a whole lot of things in terms of helping people make decisions on the ground. And here is something that I'm showing in terms of the water level and the fish biomass and the change that's happening over 10 years using the types of models that we have. And this sort of informs It creates these scenarios in the minds of the people. It shows what's going to happen when there is a pulsating river and the impact on agriculture. And we sort of talk about both fisheries and agriculture and 8 different types of fish in this particular context. And again, they are published in this space, and I can point out the publications. So the tool we developed for the people on the ground is called Midas, and it's a tool which is with a user interface. And what we did here is to come up with all kinds of very smart metrics, and we could show for every province what exactly is the data that's associated or with that particular province, and what is the risk associated with biodiversity, or what exactly is the FUSE rating, which is the food, energy, water security rating. A low rating means that this particular region has to sort of improve. A higher rating would mean that they're doing pretty well. So we mapped this for all provinces using all the data types and data that I described to you before. Again, I'm happy to talk about these metrics in greater detail if anybody is interested. But this is the decision support interface, and we engaged a lot of different stakeholders. And there's a picture of Josh Pitts, who is our data science guru, who travels with us and interacts with the public in order to show them how to run this particular tool and so on. And there is a continuous need to update these kinds of rules. And of course, this all depends on the amount of funds that are available. And there's a bigger need now because there's a lot of urbanization that has accompanied tourism and anchor wards. And we are trying to, and for over a number of years, we try to empower, train, and educate the various stakeholders with these types of tools. And again, this is pretty important because it talks to the people's livelihoods as well as the system itself, whether it can support this amount of fisheries and this amount of food security and energy security in this region. So we are assessing and deploying tools, decision tools. So the last study I want to talk about is something in the making, and that's the taking the coastal pulse, which is the project that's associated with the current COPES grant that we received. So how do you design metrics for resilient coastal communities? What are these metrics? Who would use them? How would you engage the public and the local stakeholders, just like we did in Cambodia? How do you create opportunities for sustainable investments, including fintech opportunities? These are all some of the things that would be useful to do in this context. And this project is just beginning. We haven't done anything. But obviously, we know that there's a lot of interest amongst the group on mangrove and coral damage, risk, and resilience. We are looking at sea level rise. We are looking at beach erosion. There's a lot of information available on infrastructure damage, kinds of business losses that accompany anytime there is a risk. We also have information, especially for Florida, on real estate valuation, public health, obviously, and societal vulnerability in terms of loss of income, jobs, health, and so on. So there's a lot of data that's available for this particular, especially for Florida, amongst the 3 sites, and maybe the US Virgin Islands, and somewhat for Belize. We could use all of these metrics to talk about the resilient coastal communities and what exactly is needed by these communities to address their own different problems, again, using a very holistic lens. You cannot be looking at sea level rise in isolation of anything else. You need to sort of connect it up with people. You need to obviously connect it up with, buildings, real estate, as well as mangrove and coral, presence. So this would be an interesting sort of a problem to deal with, and it's part of what's called the R4 Trust in the Strong Coast proposal. I did want to talk a little bit about the interest in coastal areas and coastal communities. Other people are also interested in it, and this is to do with sustainable finance. Why are they interested? Many people are interested in investing in blue and green bonds. And this is because of the challenge of the UN in terms of sustainability goals. Every corporation, many people out there want to be able to invest such that there is a positive environmental impact in countries such as Belize, which is already at play here. There is also a lot of regulatory, regulations in place, especially with the EU. And anybody who needs to sort of tackle these regulations has to sort of provide explanations of what makes these investments more attractive, why is it sustainable, and what is the risk disclosure. Obviously, public image is very important for many companies, such that they want to improve their brand and their customer loyalty by promoting very strong, healthy coast, as well as being socially equitable to all people who live in the coast. I've talked about risk mitigation, which is important for all kinds of purposes, including insurance. And obviously, there is financial incentive for many people because there's tax incentives offered if you invest in something green that is being promoted by states, by a country like Belize or a state like Florida. And many people want to diversify their investment portfolio by looking at a broader range of markets and reducing market volatility. So you obviously want to look at risk before you invest. And some of the folks who are interested in this kind of investment are looking at long-term viability as well as doing good for the planet. So there's a lot of interest in this blue and green bonds right now. And the COPES project provides a lot of science that's around these kinds of goals that society has. So what does COPES provide? What does the project on strong coast provide? We are going to be able to give data-driven insights. There's a lot of data. A lot of people in the different clusters of our program are working on this. We are also going to be looking at risk assessment in particular. We worked on a project on offshore wind, and I can talk about it in somewhat detail if you need. We obviously need to make environmental risk assessment for anything that's going to go or be developed in terms of infrastructure. There's emerging technologies that are happening, including aquaculture, seaweed food production in Maine, and so on. Very interesting ideas are coming forth that would provide sustainable solutions. There's also impact measurement in order to make sure that we are looking at the environmental impact of some of these funded projects, especially if you're sort of tailgating the UN sustainable goals and so on in Belize. And obviously, scenario planning is very important for countries and for towns because you want to manage your long-term risk and provide opportunities. So that's the reason we are interested in the R4 thrust of the strong coast. And as I said, there's a lot that can happen in this particular space. We've just started a project, so more about it. So I want to acknowledge science. Science is never done in isolation. It's always done with groups of very smart people who work with you. So for the malaria project, I worked with Professor Lawrence Weir, who is in Sergeant School in BU, who does a lot of public health in Sub-Saharan Africa. My student Yashang Ma and Chen Chin. My opioid study was done with Professor Manfred Fischer in the University of Vienna Business School. Gas leaks, Nathan Phillips, who's a professor at BU, and my two students, Yashang Ma and Jesse Wright. And the Cambodia study, I showed you a picture of Josh Pitts, Roel Beaumont is involved, and Les Kaufman. And I wanted to say that there are 4 Ps. There are people, there are places, there are process, and there are, of course, products that you make at the end of every project. Now I want to talk a little bit more about smart engineering and creating a sustainable society. You guys are familiar with all of this. I don't have to talk about it. Now everybody talks about smart city like Singapore. They talk about smart supply chains, smart transport, smart energy, smart buildings, smart everything, connected homes, and so on. So why is this important? engineers will have a very critical role, or they're already having a very critical role to play in the sustainable production of technologies and products that can reduce the environmental impact of human activities. And there is a lot of need that is based on taking on the role of environmental stewardship, looking at economic viability and social equity in terms of designs, developing better and better designs of these products. And all of this will help us to address and come up with more holistic solutions for complex, sustainable challenges that exist out there. So engineering is a necessity in all these spaces that I've talked about. And you engineering students, what do you have in terms of opportunities? There's a lot of opportunities to develop new technologies. There's a lot of research funding. And many people are interested in funding these kinds of companies. And obviously, there is a number of tech competitions and challenges that you could apply to, as well as innovation sort of companies that are in the space, and they are obviously emerging companies. And I wanted to sort of particularly talk about energy, green infrastructure, food production, transportation, waste management, and water. These are the spaces where I see a lot happening in terms of entrepreneurship and in terms of new companies being created. I have participated in a number of these challenges and competitions, and I'm happy to report that this is a very active space in many, many cities, including Miami, I believe, as well as, of course, in Boston. So you're trying to address what's called the triple bottom line. You're addressing a social problem, an environmental problem, at the same time looking at a financial gain by doing that. And I wanted to give you examples of some of these companies that are out there. All of them seem to be kind of new, 10 to 15 years old, not more than that. And you can see that a number of them are doing interesting things in these kinds of green, sustainable spaces. And it is such a beautiful thing to see that there's so much innovation in engineering happening in these kinds of challenges. And I did want to say our BU Corps team, the persons involved are Professor Les Kaufman, Ethan Doyle, Josh Pitts, and Raul Beaumont. And we do have graduate students and undergraduate students working with us. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you have. And I'm just about done. I didn't do great many details, but I'll be happy to answer the questions. Thank you.